Welcome to another episode of the Flush Podcast. Today's show is brought to you by our partners in the field, Walton's Inc. They have everything but the meats. If you need anything to process and prepare your wild game, Walton's has it. Ruffland Kennels. Fit your bird dog with the Ruffland Performance Kennel for a safe and comfortable ride. And by North Dakota Tourism. Plan a hunt in North Dakota this fall, and you'll find out why they call their bird hunting opportunities legendary. Today I visit with a listener of this show. A wild game recipe started our conversation a few weeks ago, but I've learned about his bird hunting escapades around the world, and it's worthy of a conversation. Welcome to episode 14 of the Flush Podcast. My name is Travis Frank. I'm the host of this show. We've been producing this podcast now for a little over 3 months, and just like the television shows that we produce, this is really a place for us to tell stories about people like you, people with a passion for the hunt. I've already heard from several of our listeners over the past several weeks, and I've gotten a lot of good feedback about this program, and I really appreciate hearing from all of you. One of the topics that has gotten the most feedback was my go-to recipe for pheasants and other wild birds. I learned it from a bird hunting buddy of mine, George Lyle, several years ago, and I shared it about a month ago on this podcast that we recorded with Jonathan Tremblay from Walton's. You can go back and listen to that if you'd like to get the recipe. But that recipe inspired Keith Marcott to reach out to me. And after talking with Keith, I felt inspired to have him on our show. Keith, welcome to the Flush Podcast. Appreciate you taking the time today.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. How would you describe your bird hunting story in a nutshell? Or who you are?
Self-starter. Didn't grow up in a hunting family, but I got started very early on, with a BB gun and a pellet gun, hunting everything I could out in the lots across the road. And from there, didn't get to hunt behind a bird dog until college. And when I did, it was instant infatuation. And I've had bird dogs ever since and been chasing birds pretty much, all over this country and in South America as well.
Wow. Where are you from originally and where do you live now?
I am originally from New York, grew up on Long Island, back at a time when Long Island was actually a little bit more country than it is now. And currently I live in Sheridan, Wyoming. I've been in Wyoming for just over 20 years now.
Gotcha. What is this pandemic done for your life today? Any changes?
Sure. I don't think anybody's gotten away without some changes, but, we like to say here in Wyoming that we've been social distancing since 1890 when the state was incorporated. We live on 35 acres, my wife and I. Our closest neighbor, which I'm looking at through the window, is just about a half mile across the valley. So it's pretty easy to go outside and be, more than enough separated from other folks. But again, shopping in the grocery stores and all that is probably pretty much the same as anywhere else. There's a lot of things that are not on the shelves and everybody's wearing masks. So it's certainly not business as usual.
Mm-hmm. What are you doing right now to pass your time?
Doing a lot of walking because I'm normally kind of a gym rat, staying in shape as best I can for the bird hunting that comes around in the fall. I've been, just so happens that this is spring planting time, and I've been involved in some habitat projects on my property, trying to make the place a little bit more enjoyable for birds and the deer as well. We are kind of lucky. We've got quite a few different types of wildlife, and everything from songbirds to raptors to we've got both mule deer and whitetail, right here in the valley. We've got wild turkeys, a few different species of game birds. So where I live was part of a big cattle ranch, and it wasn't particularly conducive to, wild game. It was more geared for hay operations. So we've been slowly but surely replacing some of that with things that are better for the critters.
How long have you been working on this project?
This will be the fourth summer that we've lived here, so this will be actually the third year of planting, replacing, hay fields with other stuff.
What kind of plants are you putting in?
Well, I've been kind of following pretty closely the teachings, if you will, of Pheasants Forever. In fact, I have kind of taken on the role of being the habitat guy for our local Pheasants Forever chapter, since I seem to be doing more of it than others. And I've been working closely with a guy up in Bozeman who's a wildlife biologist for PF. So working with them, I've been concentrating more on pollinator mix type things that will, attract birds to the insects that are there. A little bit in the way of food plots like barley and oats and actually, in years past, I've planted the rooster booster mix that Pheasants Forever puts out. And then trying to increase a little bit of the brushy cover. So adding wild plums and some junipers just for snow cover in the winter.
Have you already had birds using the habitat? I mean, you're 3 years into it. Do you have kind of a plan on when you expect it to be where you want it to be? Or can you not really answer that yet?
I'd say the jury's out. I'm a scientist by education, so 2 or 3 points don't exactly make a trend. But I could definitely say that we've had more birds around this year through the winter and into the spring. I mean, right now if I had to guess, I would say there's probably a dozen hen pheasants nesting on our property, or getting ready to do so. And that's from watching them come around all winter long. And I can still see them if when I get out and wander around in the field. So I think there's more birds now than there had been, but whether or not that's a direct result of what I've done or if it's just a good year, I can't say for sure.
Well, my gut says there's probably you're having an impact there. What one thing? So I've hunted in Wyoming only one time for upland birds, but I was really pleasantly surprised by just the opportunity at so many different species. How many birds? You said you live near Sheridan. How many
Uh-huh.
birds could you hunt in a single day if you wanted to?
At the right time of year, you could hunt certainly 3 different upland birds. And if you were willing to travel just a little bit, probably add a fourth to that. Our seasons here in Wyoming, there's a lot that happens very early in the year, which is not something that is the case in a lot of other places around the country. I mean, our seasons really get started on September 1st. But by the same token, it's generally speaking way too hot to be running, bird dogs frankly, in September at all. But when I hunted sharptails last year on opening day, we made a plan, a buddy and I, to actually try and get in and out of the field in less than an hour. And we hunted purposely near a place where we knew there was some live water because it was going into the 80s, by morning. So, but there's birds around, and Wyoming is got a lot of public land, as a lot of the states out west do.
Yep. How many different bird species can you hunt in Wyoming? Upland birds.
6. If you throw in does, you can add. You can make 7. So yeah, you've got 4 species of grouse, and then pheasants, chukars, huns. So that's 7 right there, actually. And then if wild turkeys, which I don't consider upland birds, but we have wild turkeys as well.
Do you have a favorite that you like to hunt for out there?
I do. I'm a big hunt fanatic, but I also hunt. I love chukars, but I'm also a realist, and I know that I'll be able to hunt huns. I hope longer into my old age than I can hunt huns. Although I'm still an avid chukar hunter, and we're fortunate enough that there are places where you could certainly hunt both in the same day. So, um,
Yeah, when I visited out there, oh gosh, I think it was 2 years ago. We filmed a show out there. We hunted chukar in the morning, huns in the afternoon. And
Mm-hmm.
growing up in Minnesota, I had grouse, I had pheasant, but I did not have Hungarian partridge to hunt. And I have over the last few years fallen madly in love with those birds. They live in some of the most beautiful country in North America, and they hold nice. The covey explosions is kind of like a quail, but a little bit bigger. It's just such a fantastic bird to chase. You, Keith, you have hunted all over the world. Can you rattle off your hunting escapade locations?
Oh gosh, sure. So I've been at this for a long time, like 40 years, and so when I started back in the Northeast, when I was living back there, I hunted, of course, grouse and woodcock, and actually at the time, it's probably not true anymore, but there was actually huntable populations of bobwhite quail on Long Island. So I hunted those not very successfully when I was in my teens, but I hunted those. Um, Grouse and woodcock were kind of my favorites. New York then and probably still now had something of a put and take program for pheasants, like a lot of the states back east. So we hunted those as well. Then, kind of when I got out of college, I went into the oil patch and was working down in Texas, and I discovered what good bobwhite quail hunting could be. We were drilling on property in northern Texas, and I was fortunate enough to be invited by the landowner to come down there and hunt. So my first ever destination trip, if you will, was a buddy and I drove 35 hours from New York to Texas and hunted bobwhite, and there were quite a few blue quail in those days down there. And it was a good year. Texas has a lot of boom and bust in the quail arena, but I think the limit was a dozen a day, and I don't think we had a day that we didn't shoot a limit each. And we hunted all over one dog, and probably damn near killed him. Frankly, my vet gave me a rash of grief when I came back. Um, but from that first trip, I then was looking for something a little closer, and I knew a guy who had hunted woodcock and grouse up in New Brunswick a few times. So we went to New Brunswick for probably the next maybe 3 or 4 years in a row. And that was about half the distance, maybe a 15-hour drive. And then when we kind of figured out what the hunting was like up there, and the thing about the maritime provinces in Canada is you can't hunt as a non-resident without a guide. So we had to hire a guide. So it wasn't quite a do-it-yourself hunt, but it was still very affordable. From that, we wound up hunting. We did a pheasant trip to Nova Scotia, which is kind of an interesting little sidebar story. We did a do-it-yourself trip to Quebec to hunt woodcock specifically. Very interesting to go for a trip into a country where you don't speak the language, and try to ferret out, where to get a license, and back in the days before the internet. So that was kind of the main areas that I hunted in the early days, and then in the mid '90s, I moved to Illinois for a job, and by then in those days, I was definitely most interested in grouse and actually more interested in woodcock. I love woodcock. They're kind of still my favorite bird. If you looked at the wall in the office where I'm sitting, most of the sporting art has to do with woodcock instead of any other bird. And of course, being in the Midwest, I wanted to go to the hallowed ground of the UP of Michigan and Minnesota and Wisconsin. So I did trips up there for several years, and then moved out here to Wyoming. Started hunting the chukars and huns. Actually made trips back to Minnesota every year that I was here for the first several years. But then also started hunting. Once I got into chukars, I made 2 or 3 trips a year to Nevada to hunt down there. Fantastic chukar hunting down there. And since then in the West, I've kind of hunted many different states. And Travis, I think when you and I were talking the other day, I mentioned my 2017 Odyssey, quote unquote, where I packed up my camper and my dogs and did the what I consider sort of the Tom Hugler trip, and I hunted something like 8 or 9 states and a dozen species of birds. I left home in October, early October, and I came back I think 3 days before Christmas, and I hunted prairie chickens for the first time. I hunted pheasants. I hunted bobwhites in Nebraska. I hunted, of course, Wyoming. I also went to Arizona for the first time and hunted Mearns, Gambles, and we tried scaled quail but didn't find any. Um, and then I actually went over to Oklahoma, where I have a buddy who runs GSPs, and he and I hunted both Oklahoma and Kansas for Bob White's for a week. So that was a lot of hunting. My dogs and I were both in great shape. It was a great trip. So, and then of course at the end, the other thing somewhere along the line, 2007 ish, I started going down to South America to hunt because my daughter had gone down there to be an exchange student, and that led me to chasing perdice along with ducks and a bird called a martineta, which is related to the perdice, but probably 3 times the size, closer to a hen pheasant size. So yeah, I've been around a little bit.
How do you describe? What was the name of that one?
Martineta. It's it's probably a subject of a whole nother show, but perdice is just perdice is Spanish for partridge, and so it's kind of like you in Minnesota. Or at least where I hunted up in the New England states, everybody calls grouse partridge, and in Argentina, they call it a perdiz, which is Spanish for partridge. But actually, the bird is a species of tinamou, which is not related to any partridge in any way. It's actually related to the rhea, which is an ostrich-like bird. They're one of those. That's the kind of the ostrich of South America, if you will. And so there are, I don't know, dozens of species of tinamou in South America. And this is the spotted tinamou, which happens to be the one that they hunt in Argentina. And then the martineta, also called colorado, is a larger cousin of the same bird. Many or much fewer in number. But they're actually kind of they're more like hunting a pheasant. They run more in a straight line, trying to get away, put distance between the dog and them. So a lot of fun though.
The perdiz is a bird I'm intrigued about. I've been invited to South America to hunt a couple times, and obviously everybody wants to show off their dove and their duck hunting, but
right.
I've really found a lot of interest in the perdiz. I want to come back to that bird in a little bit, but you've also hunted up in Alaska, right?
Yeah, true. I made my first trip to Alaska. I think it was 2005. Like almost everybody else who's a hunter fisherman, and I'm a very avid fly fisherman. Everybody dreams of going to Alaska if they haven't been, and it had been on my bucket list for a long time. And just coincidentally, I finally put together the trip. I had a few guys that were going with me, found an outfitter to take us bird hunting, and booked the trip. And probably 10 months in advance, something like that. And then, as luck would have it, I got involved in a business deal where my company was actually acquiring a small engineering firm up on the Kenai Peninsula. So in order to make that deal happen, I actually sort of ironically went to Alaska for business to the same town that I was going to hunt out of before I ever went hunting. So it was kind of an odd circumstance, but Yeah, we did on that particular trip. We did 4 days of fly out hunts for ptarmigan. We wound up two of the four of us in our group wound up shooting all three species, which is a little bit of a quest type thing. Not one that I had before I went, but one that I kind of discovered and just fell into while we were there. And then
when you sorry to interrupt, but when you said
no.
four fly-in days, so in Alaska, I know for big game you can't fly and hunt the same day.
Yeah, you
For
can for
upland,
birds.
you can.
Yeah,
Okay, gotcha,
yeah,
gotcha.
yeah. So we would the guide slash outfitter slash pilot, he was a wonderful guy and knows his stuff. He's been doing this a long time. Uh, he had told me when I was talking to him that, and it may or may not have been a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's probably not far off. He said if you want to hunt moose in Alaska or caribou in Alaska or brown bears, there's literally hundreds of good guides and outfitters. But if you want to hunt ptarmigan, there's probably fewer than a dozen that really know the bird and make a point of doing it and do it on purpose rather than as a sort of an add on to a fishing trip or a big game trip. So we literally flew out 4 days out of the 6 or 7 we were there to different and in different directions to different ranges, and to some extent for different birds. Like you can hunt the willow ptarmigan in one kind of territory. Usually it's lower elevation and closer to um, tundra type land where it's a little bit wet, where there are willows growing, hence the name. And then the other two species, the rock ptarmigan and the whitetail, they live higher up in very rocky country, and so you can do both in the same day in the right area, but you're going to do a lot of walking because you got to start low and wind up quite high.
One thing that, as we started talking a few weeks ago was just your interest in do-it-yourself kind of hunts. I mean, that's really something
Mm-hmm.
that intrigues me, and it intrigues you as well. You've obviously hunted all over the world. What um, what have you learned by just being able to hunt such a variety of birds and such a variety of terrain?
Um, I think it pays to do your homework, and it pays to talk to as many people as you can who, people at Game and Fish can be helpful, but you can find people that are very helpful in kind of the unlikeliest of places. I know that when I was first setting up my first do-it-yourself chucker and hunt, when I first moved to Wyoming, I had a couple of guys coming out. A couple of my buddies from back east wanted to come out and hunt, and so I was tasked with putting together a trip for the three of us in a place that it was going to be my first season. So I had never hunted these birds before. So I started asking around. I talked to Game and Fish, and one of the things that we were used to when we had done all of our trips, particularly to the North Woods, Minnesota, Wisconsin, the UP, as I'm sure you know better than me, that whole area is covered with little cabins on lakes, quote unquote resorts, and
Yep.
particularly out of season in the fall, you can rent them for dirt cheap. They're happy to have somebody in them, and a big part of our program when we do those trips is the cooking that goes along with the hunting is a big, to me, it's a huge part of the trip. So I like to have a kitchen and all that. But so when I was setting up this trip in Wyoming, I was looking for the same kind of thing. I wanted to rent a cabin, someplace we could stay and play cards at night and cook and drink too much scotch. And anyway, what I found out was that doesn't really exist in most of the Rocky Mountain West. But in my search, I wound up talking to the guy who was the president of the chamber in a little town out in out in the hills of Wyoming, and said, this is what I'm trying to do. Can you help set me up? And he said, well, I can't really tell you a place to stay that matches what you just told me about. But he said, I'm a huge hunt hunter, and if you come out here, I'd be happy to show you, around. And literally, we stopped at the Chamber of Commerce and met this guy, and he gave me a map of the county, just sort of a tourist map, and he put X's on the map. And I swear I am not lying when I tell you that every X we stopped at, we found at least one covey within 150 yards of the X. I mean,
Wow.
it was that good, and I still have the map. 15 years later, I still have that map. So,
Wow.
that's just a gem, right? So you
Is
look
that,
around and go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, is that why you ended up settling on Wyoming for home?
No, I came out here for work. I I was leaving the Fortune 500 company that I was at and trying to get back to doing something with a smaller firm. And I had the company that I wound up coming to work for was a company that I had used as a consulting firm. It's called TriHydro. It's an environmental consulting firm, and they, I had become pretty good friends with the a guy who was at the time he was a vice president, and he said, "Hey, if you're looking for something, why don't you come out here?" And he knew what a crazy fly fisherman I was, and he played that card and said, "Yeah, there's lots of good fishing." I
He
came
hooked
out
you.
here. Yeah, I took the fly, and here I am. So.
Well, and you referenced your 2017 Odyssey trip in your camper where you hunted all over the country. It was kind of a retirement tour for you, wasn't it?
It was. It was. I had been an owner in that company uh, for 18 years, and I sold my stock out so that I could go part time, and I really had for many years I had been kind of dreaming about that trip, and literally when I sold my stock on October 1st, and on October 5th I packed up the trailer, and my wife and I traveled to northern Minnesota and pitched camp. And she stayed with me for about a week. She's not a hunter, but she likes to she does a lot of wildlife photography. So she was happy to walk around the lake and take long trail walks and take pictures. And on some days she'd go for a walk with me, and shoot some of the always the best photos I have of my hunting are the ones she takes, because she cares more about the photos than any of the rest of it. But then I took her off to the airport, and from then I wasn't entirely by myself, because I had planned out the trip where I wanted to go, and I have friends, as you can imagine, just as you do, kind of all scattered around the country who are avid. Most of them not quite as avid as me, but a couple that are even maybe a little bit more crazy, and they joined me in various places around the country. So one of my friends, Jim Sorensen, came in and showed up at my camp one day in Minnesota, and he and I hunted for several days, and then I joined some other friends in South Dakota for a little while. Going back to the question about how you make things happen, I had made a friend through business that literally the connection was her sister used to be a summertime chef at a ranch in Nebraska. And I met, when talking to her, she introduced me to her sister. Her sister made an introduction to this 80-year-old ranching couple in Nebraska. And they said it would be okay if I pitched my camp on their ranch for a couple of days. And what that turned into was I pulled into their dooryard with my Airstream, and they said, "Yeah, park it right there and join us for dinner every night while you're here." And the next morning, the guy took me out, drove me to the top of a hill, and this is Nebraska, right? So it's relatively flat, but on top of a hill. And he just kind of opens his arms up and he goes, "Yeah, pretty much everything you can see here is mine. So you can hunt all of it." And
Wow.
there was prairie chickens and pheasants in the draws, and sharp-tailed grouse. And I stayed there for a week. And the main reason I stayed there for a whole week was because the pheasant season didn't open until the end of that week. And every day I'd come back from hunting, and this wonderful woman named Lila would say, did you shoot any pheasants? And I would say, Lila, the season's not open yet. And she would say, yeah, but they're my pheasants and it's my ranch. And I said, yeah, but I'm not that guy. I said, but I'll stay till the season opens. And literally the morning the season opened, I went out not far from their house, shot and cleaned 3 birds and left them for her. And she was just happy as could be.
The people that you meet on the road, I enjoy it almost as much as the hunt. I mean, it's pretty close. I mean, I've met some incredible people. You obviously have too. One thing that I've been asked a lot is, I wanna hunt like you, or I want to be able to hunt all the time, or I want to do it for a living, or whatever. And how do you do it? And I actually, my advice, or for people that say I want to hunt or I want to fish every day, and I say, you get yourself a really good job, a really well-paying job. You work really hard, so when you're done working, you can just go and enjoy yourself and your time and experience some of these things. And it sounds like that's exactly what you did.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I would offer that same advice, but I would caveat it with this. When I was much younger, I had this idea to do exactly what you described, which is, I was going to work really hard, try and retire early, put my money away, and then do my traveling and all that. And I had the very unfortunate luck of being involved in a pretty bad car accident, and I walked away in pretty darn good shape compared to what could have happened. And the next morning, I turned to my wife, who was always wanting to travel, and I said, book us a trip someplace, as soon as you can, because as it turns out, you could get hit crossing the street, and if you wait until the end to do all the stuff, you may not get to do it. So my approach came to be, achieve the balance. So I took 1 week-long hunting trip a year, bird hunting trip. I took it every year. We just called it the trip. And it got to the point where my wife did not say, "Are you going this year?" She would say, "When is your trip?" So and then we did our family stuff as well. But I fit that trip in every year. And not everybody gets to go to all different places, but kind of like you and I, talked about a little bit, Travis. I mean, none of the trips that I took over all those years were expensive. We paid for gas. We cooked our own food. We stayed in the cheapest places we could find. Sometimes we camped, and sometimes we stayed in cheap, motels, and sometimes we rented those little lodges. But it doesn't necessarily take a lot of money to make those trips. You just have to be committed and make the time.
It's true. I mean, I talk to a lot of people, and they say, "Oh, you went out there. It must have cost thousands of dollars." And I said, actually, we drove there. We stayed in this place, and this was a price there because during that season, it's very inexpensive. We cooked our own meals, and it probably cost us a couple $100 more than it would have just living at home for the week. We just had to make the plans and make them happen. So a lot of these opportunities, these public land places, anybody can take advantage of them. They can experience it, and you can start to, like you. I mean, you've got dozens and dozens of locations you've hunted, dozens of bird species around the world, and over time, you can really look back on your life and say, "Wow, I've experienced some incredible hunts, some incredible places I've seen, and met amazing people," which you will do. You can't go on the road and not meet people like you were talking about.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that Alaska trip that I talked about, now that if you do a fly out in Alaska, that's not an inexpensive trip. But to me, that was a once in a lifetime trip. We decided to pay for that, but Oh, 2 years ago, I was back in Alaska with my whole family on vacation, and I was going to stay longer than them. And on like the last day that I was there, I was walking into a coffee shop, and this guy coming out of the coffee shop was wearing brush pants, bird hunting pants. And it stopped me because you don't run into bird hunters in Alaska, and I just said, brush pants? You're a bird hunter? And we got into a conversation in front of the coffee shop. And it turns out the guy's a wildlife biologist, works for Fish and Wildlife. And he said, oh, yeah, I love to hunt birds. And he says, I can't hunt tomorrow, but I'll hunt with you the next day. And we were going to hunt for spruce grouse. And I had not had luck finding spruce grouse, oddly enough. And he said, yeah, we'll go. I think I could figure out a couple of places. Well, the next day he calls me up and he goes, well, I was doing a swan survey today in an air. They were flying over the peninsula, like counting swans because they nest up there. He said, and I saw some ground. I think should be really good spruce grouse. And so we, he and I together drove to this place and had like an epic spruce grouse hunt where we probably flushed 35 birds in about 3 hours. And if you've hunted spruce grouse, you know that flushing them and getting shots at them is two different things. But
Right. Yep.
But it was a totally chance meeting, and probably one of the best days of grouse hunting I've ever had.
So, what is the most challenging bird based off of all of the different species you've hunted in your lifetime? What's the most challenging, rewarding hunt that you could go on for birds?
I actually, hands down, mountain quail.
Okay.
I did, a couple of years ago, I realized after doing my Odyssey that I had shot 5 of the 6 quail that you can shoot in the United States. And I thought, well, I might as well get, number 6. And I always, as an aside, I look at those things like it's just a reason to go. It's not, I'm not a trophy hunter in any respect at all, but I was like, wow, I've shot 5. I've never hunted quail in California. Let's try that out. And so I have a buddy, who had, he's one of the few people who have actually shot all 20 of the birds that, depending on whose list you listen to. Mm-hmm. He has shot all 20 upland birds in North America. And he's done it over points over 2 different dogs, which is pretty amazing. And that's to say he shot all 20 over each of the 2 dogs. Anyway, he did California quail, and he said, yeah, I'll go. I've been thinking about going back there. I haven't been. And just long story short, we went out there, and for expediency's sake, we hired a guide that he had used 10 years ago. And we decided to use him just for a couple of days just to kind of get our feet on the ground. And the hunting those birds, if you haven't done it, it's steep like chukar hunting. It's physically very demanding. The brush is crazy thick, and the damn birds don't behave very well. They have this tendency to like sit in a really thick, brushy oak, and then you can see your dog on point, but you can't get to him because it's so damn thick, and you finally, basically, crawl your way over there, and then the birds get up like when you're just at a gun range. They blow out the other side, and sometimes you don't even see them. I mean, it's like if you could imagine combining hunting rough grouse in chukar type topography with cover as thick as a good woodcock cover. That's about what it's like.
So that's that. I was just going to say, it sounds like you were hunting rough grouse in the mountains.
Yeah, and the difference is the brush is really thick and it's all just higher than your head. So, and I can tell you that when I shot the first one, which came up wild off of, I think it was my dog. I can't even be sure because we had a few dogs on the ground, and that bird came across at like Mach 2, and it just happened to come by me, and I threw up my my 28 and pull the trigger. And when the bird fell, I was like, I let out a war whoop. I was like, which I haven't done it since I was much younger. I was just like, I can't believe I finally got one. And if I had to go home at that point, it would have been okay. But we wound up over the course of 2 days. We wound up, killing maybe, I don't know, half a dozen or so a piece. In 4 days of hunting, and during those same 4 days, we also hunted valley quail and shot, twice as many valley quail in half the time because we spent most of our time on the mountain quail. It was all summed up for me when I said to the guide, how many people, because he guides a lot of different stuff. And I said, how often do you guide mountain quail? And he said, not very often. And I said, well, how many guys have ever come back and done it twice? And he looked at my buddy Jim and said, he's the only one.
Really?
So I can tell you that it's tough. I mean, I've heard I think it's been on your podcast where I've heard people say, you do this hunt and it's terrible. And, while you're out there on the last day, you're going, I'm never doing this again. And then like 5 days later, you're going, that wasn't so bad. I could do that again. Well, I haven't gotten there yet after 2 years. I'm sure I would do it again if somebody said, we got the trip set up, let's go. But boy, it was hard. It was hard.
This past fall, I was riding in a boat, driving across the middle of Lake Michigan. Ron Boehm from the Hunting Dog podcast was sitting next to me. We had filmed the show out on an island in the middle of the lake, and we both kind of looked at each other and smiled. I said, will you come back? And he goes, nah, I'll do something else. And I agreed with him, and I said it was a hunt of it's hard to say it's a hunt of a lifetime, right? Everyone wants to say that, but it was such an incredible, unique experience, the hunt that we went on there. That episode is going to air this fall. I'm really excited about it. But just the fact that there are so many other opportunities like it. And so I just have this drive to experience something new each time. And, for Ron, it was the same thing. He's like, nah, there's more out there. Kid, if you could own, so all the places you've been, right?
Yeah.
If somebody that's listening says, gosh, what's the best one? What's that bucket list? I have to do it once in my life. Which one would it be for you?
Wow. I think I would have to, I hate to parse to answer your question with a question, but part of it would be like, is the person really want to just do something different? Like I got a buddy who is my age, and I'm in my early 60s, and he is going to go back again this year to try and shoot a Himalayan snowcock, and to hear him talk about the pain and suffering they went through, and he still wants to do it again just because it's the challenge. Bless him. But for me, it's got to be the kind of thing where if I was answering it for somebody just like me, I would say that probably a really good hunt, which you could do. And actually my bucket list trip is going to be, it's Canada, probably Alberta, to hunt huns, as described by Guy Levaldane, the guy who wrote, several different books on meditations on hunting, amongst others. He loves huns the way probably more than I do, if anything. And I'd love to go out and hunt them in the kind of cover that is sort of more storied. The wheat edges of wheat fields. The old homesteads. Wyoming does not have hun country that looks anything like anything you've read about in a book. That's just not where our huns are. We don't have that. So I'd like to try that. But, for the average person, if you've never done it, boy, a good woodcock hunt, if you can catch the flight, I mean, that's amazing. You get to see so many birds. You get to see phenomenal dog work if the dogs are any good at all. And although I probably would have to argue with a lot of people about it, I don't think there's a better bird on the table. Frankly, I love woodcock in terms of table fare. So I think you tell a lot of people, oh, you need to go hunt grouse, rough grouse if you haven't done it. Well, that's not a trip to do just once because a lot of people do it just once and don't shoot any, right?
Right.
Uh,
Yep.
how long was it before you shot your first one when you started hunting them as a kid? For me, I hunted them 3 years in college before I killed one. So um, it's a tough question to ask.
Yep. Yep.
My buddy Joel and I, we get into these philosophical conversations where we ask, if you could only hunt one bird for the rest of your life, what would it be? And most people answer that by their favorite bird, and I kind of answered it the last time he asked me with well, it might be chuckers, except I don't think I could do it for the rest of my life. I think Huns give me the best. Huns give me the best chance of actually hunting longer,
Yeah.
and I think that's why a lot of guys wind up hunting pheasants, especially when they get older. That it's typically pretty flat. You can be a blocker. You don't have to necessarily be one of the guys walking the field. You know how that goes.
Yep. Yep. Well, and you tend to hunt birds that live where you are too. I've got two questions. We'll try to keep these fairly short, but the
Okay.
first one, the first one, if you can explain what it's like to hunt perdees in South America, just try to sum it up in a few minutes. What is that? What does that bird do to a dog? What's the terrain that they live in? And is it a hunt worth the time to go down there to pursue?
Um, I would answer the first or the last question first. I think it's definitely worth the time. I like it quite a bit. There are not very many places down there that will book you for like a 5 day perdiz hunt because um, it's just it's not the kind of thing that really lends itself to 5 full days of going afield like you would to you could go hunt Huns or something and hunt a bunch of different covers, and you can do it every day. You don't shoot that many birds, right?
Hmm.
So perdiz are birds that are roughly the size of a quail, a little bit bigger than a quail. They fly a lot like a quail, except they're always in singles. Kind of the most interesting thing that makes them so different, in my mind, is that the way they act on the ground. They run depending on the conditions. If it's windy, they tend to run a lot, but they don't run in the sense that we think of pheasants as kind of the most classic, or the desert quail run like crazy. But as a general rule, they all are trying to put distance between you and them. A perdiz is just trying to juke you. It's trying to. It'll run in a circle. It'll run in a figure eight. It'll hook behind you. It'll run a little ways and then stop and sit and then run and sit. And the young dogs, it just kind of they become unglued. They almost look like they're chasing their tail after a little while. But the good ones that have been at it a while, they get very cautious, and typically it's a sort of a European style deal where you walk up on the pointing dog. The guide will tell you don't walk in front of the dog because the bird may not be in front of the dog. So you basically tell the handler will typically say "bat bat bat," which means go go go, and he's encouraging that dog to relocate. And your job is to just keep walking right behind the dog, like right off its rear flank, and eventually the dog will get to the point where literally he stops. The guide says go, and sometimes you even nudge the dog like with your knee, push him forward, and he pushes back on you, and the bird's right there. And then you can step in front of the dog, and the bird gets up.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
they're not crazy tough, birds to kill. They go down, they're kind of like a woodcock. They take a couple of pellets. They don't generally run when they hit the ground once you hit them. And it's open cover. It's like kind of like hunting sharptails. It's
Hmm.
wide open typically. So, but it's a lot of fun.
Keith, what? Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot here. You've been hunting a long time. The food is a big part of this for you. Can you give us your favorite bird recipe and how it's done simply?
My favorite bird recipe, is probably going to be blue grouse. Fresh that day. When you get back to camp, you clean that bird, cut it into chunks, put it in essentially Italian dressing, oil and a little bit of vinegar and some herbs, and let it sit in a plastic bag while you're kind of taking care of your dogs, putting the dogs up, getting them fed, checking them over, putting your gear away, and about the time you're done with all of that and the fire's ready, it's time to just put them on a skewer and cook them just like hot dogs over a campfire. Cook them until they're done. They're just the way each person likes them because you're each holding your own stick, and then serve that with some kind of rice pilaf or something on the side, and that's as simple and as good as it gets. And you know there's a lot more complicated ways, and I cook a lot of things. Kind of way more high end than that, but often with those birds, especially birds, the white meated birds. One of the reasons that I like huns and woodcock more is because they have a much more bold flavor palette. The white birds, I think it's Hank Shaw who said, if you take the skin off them, you might as well be eating store bought chicken. So the key is to not make them tough, and that's so you grill them quick over a fire, and you have a pretty good chance of eating them when they're just done.
Well, and it doesn't hurt when your bonfire happens to be up in a mountain and you're watching the sunset over a valley. So that may add to the whole flavor of that moment a little bit.
Yeah, everything tastes better when you cook it outside. That's for sure.
Yeah, amen to that. Hey, Keith, I think we need to spend a few days together in the field this fall. Maybe we'll go to Alberta together. And we'll film a television show, and that way we can talk about it and people can watch it, and hopefully be inspired to one day do the same.
Yeah, I'd be all over it, Travis.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for reaching out. Appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time today. Let's just stay in touch, and maybe we'll dig into how to hunt specific birds on do-it-yourself type of hunts later on this summer as people start getting really into the planning for their season. Maybe, you've got so much knowledge. I just feel like we've barely scratched the surface. So again, I appreciate you taking the time today. Good luck with your food plots that you're putting in right now and all of the cover, and stay safe out there, and we'll be in touch soon. That does it for today's episode of the Flush Podcast. We'll catch you next week, and I have a very interesting guest lined up that you're going to want to come back for him. He served in Afghanistan, and he has now continued his mission back here in the United States, and it has everything to do with bird dogs. We'll catch you next week on the Flush Podcast.